everyone to the second of our webinar series. This one's called Playing to Win versus Playing to Avoid Losing. Which mindset will you choose? So just for any of you that don't know who we are, my name's David Tomkinson. I'm from a company called the And Partnership, and we work with organisations helping them to manage their way through change and anything to do with helping to align behaviours with operational goals. So why are we doing these webinars? Well, what we were very keen to do was to see how we could help organisations and individuals to actually cope with these pretty unprecedented times that we're actually finding ourselves in. So we wanted to give something to people to say, well, how do you actually keep yourselves in as good a shape as you possibly can do during these times? So that's really where they were coming from. You may well have done some webinars if you're all working from home, or many of you are working from home, but we just wanted to highlight some of the ground rules for today. It's going to be a 30-minute session. We're going to lead the content, but there will be lots of opportunity to interact with polls, whiteboard, and a chat. As we go through, you'll see, I'll explain the Zoom for anyone that hasn't used it before, but there is a toolbar that's actually got a live chat on it. So please use that to ask any questions as we're going through. And either myself or my colleague, Lee, who's working in the background helping me technically today, we'll come back to you and try and answer the questions either on the webinar or after we've finished. Your microphone is going to be on mute during the session, just so we restrict noise. We don't get any dogs barking or children playing or anything like that. Just as a reminder, make sure your power cable's connected. It can be very easy for your device to actually run out halfway through, which can be very annoying. You might want to have a pen and paper handy if there's any notes you want to take. And a recording will be available on our website, probably tomorrow or the day after, once we actually get it just into shape. Okay, so for those of you that haven't used Zoom before, moving your cursor around if you're on a laptop, or just finding it if you're on an iPhone or a tablet, there is a toolbar on there, and it gives you the opportunity to actually join in the live chat. So that should be on the toolbar that you can find. So for the short webinar, we're going to mute your sound, as we've said before. It's your choice whether you actually want to have the video camera turned on or off, but we suspect most people won't want to see in the inside of their offices or bedrooms. We might ask you to participate in polls. These will pop up on your screen for you to complete. And obviously, please click submit when you've finished with these. Okay, so that's just running through a few things as to how the Zoom will work. So just a tiny bit about me, because we haven't got much time. So I'm a director of the And Partnership, one of the founding directors. And you can tell that Lee did some of my slides for me. Mad keen Aston Villa fan, mad being the operative word. You have to be mad to support Aston Villa, that's for sure. But I've been with the business since the start, so we've been going for 17 years now, and we work with some really great clients. We're very lucky to have a great client list, which is all sort of shown on our website. So in terms of what we're going to be doing today, this is a section we're calling very loosely the sort of research and planning section, giving people a chance to taste some bite-sized pieces of what we do and how we do it. Now, obviously, this isn't what we would usually do, as I'm sure we're all finding we have to adapt to changing times. But this gives you a sort of a snippet of one of the sections of our leadership offering. And hopefully, it'll also give you some self-development as well. And just a little bit about what we believe in our leadership offering, rather than detailed content. But we have a passionate belief that we are all great leaders some of the time, and that we're all at our best selves some of the time. What interests us is why we're not at our best selves more of the time. And obviously, in times of massive change, as we're in at the moment, that can be even less of the time that we find ourselves in that best self place. So what we explore during the leadership work we do is how do you get to be more aware of which mode you're in, and how do you have choices about how do you get yourself from one mode into the more positive best self mode. So in terms of this about playing to win and playing to avoid losing, and what can happen is that our minds tend to play tricks on us in uncertain times. And what you might be finding in these very sort of turbulent strewn times, is that our minds can take us down a very anxious, narrow, and often unhelpful road. And therefore we can find ourselves in a more negative place than we would usually be. So what we're going to do is we're just going to put a poll up and see how people are faring at the moment. And we're going to ask you to just think about, in the past couple of weeks, how often have you found yourself feeling in a negative place? So Lee's going to pop a poll up there. Never. You might be a very positive person. You might have found yourself being negative once or twice, or maybe even once or twice a day, hourly, or most of the time. So just click on your poll and then submit, if you would, for us. Okay, we've got 4 or 5 people still to vote. Okay, everybody voted that would like to. Coming up. Okay, so there's the results of the poll then from the people that are on here today. So 54% of us have felt negative at some time in the last couple of weeks. Nobody has never felt negative in the last couple of weeks. And even some of us, sort of 38%, once or twice a day. And we're finding that's quite common with the more people we're talking to, is that this kind of negativity is quite a common trait of the current crisis we're in, because obviously it's a very worrying time. And if we don't try and keep ourselves in great shape, then it can take us down that road even more often, which can have a detrimental effect on our health and well-being. And often what we do is we focus on how we can protect what we have and stop things getting any worse. We call this kind of playing to avoid losing. It sometimes feels like it's just survival mode. So the sort of behaviors we see when we're in playing to avoid losing, we're going to get a whiteboard up now. We're going to take the poll off the screen, and we're going to put the whiteboard up if we can. And then we're going to be having a look at some of the behaviors that you see when people are in playing to avoid losing. Okay, just waiting for the whiteboard to come up. Okay, so while that's going on, in case there's any technical issues at the, oh no, here we come. So while we're doing this, if you could be thinking about, have you seen people that are in playing to avoid losing mode at work, or when you're actually dealing with your teams? What sort of behaviors do you see when people are in this playing to avoid losing place? And typically, the sort of ones that we actually get coming up, which Lee's going to try and add for me on one side of the whiteboard here under playing to avoid losing. So typical behaviors that you might see, I'll give you a few to start. If you can think of any other behaviors, please send them in on the chat. If you've got experience of either people that you've seen being in this place, or if you felt being in this place yourself, what sort of behaviors do you see? So the first one typically would be cautious, much more cautious than we would be in positive times, and particularly risk averse. So not taking any particular risks. Often people say they keep their head down when they're in playing to avoid losing. And they can end up blaming other people rather than being realistic about their part in something. They can be very insular and not sharing things, and also focused on the here and now rather than the future. Okay, so we're starting to get them coming through from other people. Very often people catastrophize. It's a good one for Lee to spell. So catastrophize, saying things are going to be a lot worse than they are. And also denial. So denial that things are happening, and kind of a focus on a narrow scope. And a good one there, covering your back. So making sure that everything is covered, and you're obviously copying people in on things that they don't need to be copied in on, etc. So that's the kind of list for the playing to avoid losing. I'm sure there's more. Keep them coming through if you've got any other ideas, if you see people in that particular place. Now, people who spend a lot of time here are sometimes called mood hoovers. So you know mood hoovers when you see them because they suck the life out of conversations or out of meetings. So just when you're trying to get a positive vibe going in a meeting, somebody will say, "Oh, we tried that in 1967, didn't work then, it's not going to work now." Or "No point suggesting that, nobody listens." Or "In the current crisis, it's so boring staying at home, there's nothing to do." So you might sort of feel some of those, you might see some of those phrases being used. The language is very important here. And that's the sort of some of the playing to avoid losing language. They do say that everyone knows a mood hoover. So if you don't know a mood hoover, then it might just be you. So it's worth thinking about who the mood hoovers are in your lives. Okay, so the more positive way of looking at situations are what we call playing to win. And this is where you actually look at things and say, how good could this be? So even when something is bad, how could we make the best of it? So again, if you can think about typical behaviors that you might see in playing to win and send those through on the chat, I'll try and cover as many of those as you send through. So just to get started, you very often see people taking calculated risks in this particular mode. They're much more likely to work as a team. And much more likely to be giving to other people rather than just insular. They tend to try things out, are much more willing to fail. So they try things out and are okay to fail. And they tend to be much more empowering. And in this mode, it's much easier to focus on the future than it is in playing to avoid losing. So we're getting some great ones coming through here. So they share ideas as well, learn from mistakes, and they tend to look at challenge like an opportunity. So they turn challenge into an opportunity. And quite an important one, they're not obsessed with perfection. So they're okay to get things just about right. They're not just trying to make things absolutely perfect. So that just gives you some of the behaviors that you can see when someone's in playing to win mode. And people who spend more time in this place are often in their best self, as we call it. So if you think about times when you're at your best, the chances are some of these playing to win behaviors will be the ones that you demonstrate. You tend to look for possibilities, making the best of a situation. And the sort of phrases you hear here tend to be, "I know we tried this before, but so what could we learn to make it work this time?" Or "Let's try suggesting this in a different way so that management can hear it." Or "In the current crisis, how can I use my time at home to achieve some things I've never had time for?" So you tend to see the difference in the language. It tends to be very much more constructive and focused on what could be rather than how do we stop something being bad. And that tends to be the difference between the two. We all spend time in both places, but do we do it consciously is the thing to ask yourself, or do we allow people and situations to dictate where we are? And if we can take the whiteboard down, I will share my screen again, which I think I need to do technologically here. Bear with me. So you'll see that playing to avoid losing and playing to win both happen in high energy and low energy states. It's not that playing to win is lots of high energy and whooping and false positivity, and playing to avoid losing is just burying your head in the sand. It can be, but it's not the only thing. So you'll see here that some of the emotions or behaviors that you get in high energy playing to avoid losing might be angry or aggressive or controlling in the detail. Just as in playing to win side, very much on the front foot, driving, buzzing, confident. And then the low energy states, you might get people on the playing to avoid losing side who are withdrawn or quiet or playing it safe. And on the high energy, calm, peaceful, reflective. So it's not all about high and low energy. You get both high and low in both states, worth saying. So in terms of, just to tell you a very quick anecdote, one of our good friends who was on the webinar yesterday, one of our associates, Andy Cope, tells a really good story about an example of these two. And he said that he used to be prone to playing to avoid losing, and he'd be in his study and his 8-year-old son would come in and say, "Dad, will you read me a story?" And he used to turn around frustrated and say, "What now?" And he'd say, "Well, you did promise, Dad." And he'd say, "Right, fine," close the laptop, march him upstairs, plonk him in bed, open the book, read the story really quickly, missing out some pages if you can get away with it, slam the book shut, turn the light out, downstairs, open the laptop, carry on working again. He said what he does now, having moved to a playing to win mindset, is as he's going up the stairs with his son, he says, "How would the best dad in the world read this story?" And of course, the best dad in the world would put all the voices on, they'd get the intonations, they'd make it fun, they'd make it exciting at the end, da, 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 close the book, turn the light out, downstairs, open the laptop. The point he makes is that it takes no more time to be in playing to win than playing to avoid losing, but achieves a completely different outcome. So that's something I personally use a lot now, is how would the best, and you can substitute dad for brother, friend, employee, boss, deal with this. It's a really good way of just getting yourself into that frame of mind where you're thinking about your best self. So the really good news about this is there is a choice. It may not feel like it sometimes, but there is a choice, and we can get better at playing to win by practicing. So it happens a lot in sport. And for whatever sport you're into, I'm personally, I like football, if that's not mutually exclusive from liking Aston Villa. But if you think about football particularly, the teams that try to defend and stop themselves losing are often caught out by a team that's actually in full attacking mode. And anybody that's a Manchester United fan out there, you know, Fergie time, as they used to call it, was not something false. That actually was real, because all of the people in Manchester United were drilled to never give in until the final whistle. So if they got a lot of injury time, they'd still be pushing ahead, and that's why they used to win so many matches in the sort of injury time. I personally like watching penalty takers coming up to the spot to see if I can guess whether they're going to score, as to whether they look like they're in playing to win mode or playing to avoid losing mode. I'm going to score this versus, oh, I better not miss this because this is a really important penalty. So it happens a lot, happens in tennis, happens in golf, happens a lot. Anybody who's a golfer knows that you know, you can be in playing to avoid losing one week and play completely badly, and then playing to win the next week and play like a champion. So, there's other anecdotes. I'm not going to go through them all, but very, very quickly, you possibly know how the Post-it note was invented. If you don't, it was actually created by a technician in the research and development department of 3M. And they actually were trying to invent a new glue, and they made a mistake. They actually invented a glue that wouldn't stick permanently. And in a culture of playing to avoid losing, it would have been, right, bury the evidence, don't tell the boss, see if we can sneak this under the radar. In their culture, it was, what could we do with a glue that doesn't stick permanently? And as they say, the rest is history. It's still the biggest selling stationery product of all time. And the Toyota one is really just around when Toyota first came to the UK. Again, whether this is true or not, the story is a good one, so I'll tell it. But they allegedly sent an order over to Japan for some parts, obviously two very different cultures in the two car manufacturing industries. And on the order they placed, it was, we only want 3 faulty parts per 1,000. And when they got the shipment back over, there was a nice little note attached to it saying, we've enclosed your 1,000 parts. We didn't really understand what you meant about the 3 faulty ones, but we've attached them separately anyway. And just the whole sort of difference in the culture, I quite like in that story, between getting the error rate as low as you can, or what error rate. So some of those just show you some of the difference in the language we use and the expectations we have. And of course, playing to win and versus playing to avoid losing can have a massive impact on our health and well-being. We're far more likely to be at our best and perform at our best when we're in playing to win. So these are some of the phrases that we actually, just to show you some of the difference in the language. And then we're going to give you a chance to have a think about how do you turn some of the playing to avoid losing statements into playing to win. So I can see this being a problem versus how can we make this happen? Or you need to stop making so many mistakes versus we need to build on your strengths. Let's aim for 2% growth versus how can we be the best in our field? And the market is tough, that's just the way it is. Or the market is tough, how can we use this to our advantage? So we're just going to spend a couple of minutes just having a think about some statements. And what I'd like you to do, the only bit of genuine participation that we can do via this medium, but have a think about what statement you would put in place to get the message, the same message, but in a playing to win format rather than playing to avoid losing. Okay, so a playing to win equivalent of these statements, if you can. And we'll give you a couple of seconds to do each one. So the first one is, he's always moaning, bringing the team down. I'll avoid asking for his opinions in future. So just have a go on the chat and have a think about how would you write that in a more playing to win way. And I'll go down through the others as well, because you might only want to have time to do one of these, and there might be one you'd prefer to do. The second one is, filling in this report's a waste of time. No one reads it and it's out of date before I send it. I'm sure none of us have ever had that occasion happening. So what's the playing to win equivalent of that statement? And then finally, they are useless, always making mistakes. I just want to get rid of them. Again, I'm sure none of us have ever thought that about anybody in our teams or in our organizations, but how would you put that into a more playing to win type of statement? Okay, let's have a quick look at what's coming through on the chat. So a good one on the first one. So he seems to think differently to me. Let's find out what's behind his opinion. Would be a good one on the he's always moaning one. Yeah. On the report one, what do people really need to take from this report, and how do I make it engaging? Really good one, rather than just looking at it as a waste of time. Or another one on that one, they are useless statements. They need more support and guidance. So actually sort of focusing on the support and guidance that somebody needs. And then a final one on the last chat there. I need to find out about their strengths and what motivates them to see how I can guide them better. So much more focused on their strengths rather than on the fact that they're not performing or that they're making a lot of mistakes. So you get the sort of idea as to the language is being really, really important. So thank you for filling those in, those of you that were able to look at that. But it's all, what you'll hopefully do from this webinar is you'll start observing and seeing people when they're in that playing to avoid losing mode. You'll actually hear the language being different. You'll probably hear yourself saying things following on from today. And the one reflection we'd like you to take away from this, and this is really just an optional extra really for you, we would do this in our session on playing to win in the moment with leadership groups, but you might want to write these questions down or take a picture of the screen. What am I like when I'm in each mode? What impact do you notice that you're having on other people in each mode? So when you're in playing to avoid losing versus playing to win, what impact on others do you have? And then what triggers you in and out of each mode? Usually something triggers you in and out of playing to win. So you might be feeling really positive in these turbulent times, and then you watch the news and it takes you right back into playing to avoid losing. By noticing those triggers, sometimes you can then avoid doing some of the things that actually take you into playing to avoid losing. And certainly limiting the news intake has been a massive difference to me into how I'm feeling at the moment. I just watch the news once a day, and I don't watch the 10 o'clock news and then go to bed because my mind would just be racing on what I've just seen. So I'm personally watching the 6 o'clock news and then I've got time to get it out the system before I go to bed. Okay, so just conscious that we're getting close to the end here. We've done some top tips just for you to take away and have a think about from what we've talked about today. So look out for these behaviors in yourself and see what happens if you make a different choice. So test it out and see what happens. Sorry, I've got trigger happy on the mouse. Practice reframing negative thoughts into playing to win language. So when you notice that you're having those thoughts, what would that look like if it was in playing to win language? If you're faced with a playing to avoid losing language from other people, ask playing to win questions to help both of you to feel more positive. Yeah, don't forget, this isn't about rah-rah or false positivity. It's just reframing and changing the language slightly. When you're having discussions with your team, if you feel them going down what we call the playing to avoid losing rabbit hole, and you can just feel the energy soaking away, ask the question, what would this look like if it were playing to win? Be a very good way of just reframing things. And finally, consider choosing your attitude every morning when you wake up, when you get out of bed, when you realize this isn't a nightmare, that we are actually living through this. Which attitude do I want to have today? Because the good news is it is your choice. You can choose to be more in playing to win mode. Okay, so if there are any questions that you've got about this, please fire them through and we'll either try and answer them in the last couple of minutes we've got, or we will answer them outside of the session. But in terms of, I hope you found this session useful. We would obviously be very happy to discuss with you how we could run a longer session for your organization or for individuals to help them through these difficult times. We've also got a number of other webinars coming up. So these are the things that we do online already. So we've got more free webinars. I'll talk about them in a second. We've got one-to-one online coaching. We've got something called the Wheel of Wellbeing that we can do online, and client-specific online webinars, digital workshops. We've also got a mental health aware half day that's online. I'm assuming that Donna's asked me just to go back to the last screen, so I'm assuming it's that one, just to finish writing those down perhaps. So I'll just come back through these screens slowly in a second. Okay, I hope that's been long enough just to catch the last one or two. And then we've got the webinar schedule. So this is online, it's all on our website. If you want to have a look at some of these, we'd love to see you at as many of these as you'd find useful. We've got 3 categories. How are you being at your best during this time? We've got personal development, if you've got more time to focus on that. And then we've got research and planning in terms of thinking about how this could work for you or your teams in the future. If there aren't any topics, if there are any topics that aren't there that you'd like to see, please drop us a note and we'll see what we can do. So just the final slide, couple of slides, is one is around, please follow us on LinkedIn. That way we'll keep you informed of any new webinars, new topics, new events we're doing. You can email us, there's an address and a phone number there. And if you want to access our website, there's lots of case studies and things about how we've actually done some of this work with some great organizations. So if you wouldn't mind, just before finishing, if you open your camera on your phone and just photograph this QR code. With the wonders of technology, you should get a very simple 4 or 5 question feedback form. We're always trying to improve the webinars that we do, so it would be really helpful if you wouldn't mind just giving us some quick feedback on how useful the webinar has been. So I shall leave that up there while I mute myself, but it's great to have virtually seen you all, and I hope that you'll join us for some more webinars in the future. So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.